Hey, Elizabeth.
Hi.
Michael. Hey, Ellen.
Hey.
So I just clicked something and kicked Darren and Heather off. So I'm just gonna email them. Like right
Okay.
before you all showed up, they were both here, and then I clicked something and now they're gone. So, I can hear you, but I can't see you because I'm gonna like look at other screens.
33 and Jim Schwartz.
Hey, Mixway. Hey, Richard.
Hey.
Hey. So I was just explaining to the others that I just pressed something and kicked Darren and Heather out of the meeting right before
Perfect.
you showed up. So I'm just re-pinging them to say come back.
I'm on my phone today, so I might turn my video off for most of the meeting.
Okay. Man, that's a bummer that just happened. No worries about camera or not camera or any of that. Hey, Nathaniel, welcome.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Good to see all of you.
Yep, there's a bunch of us so far. Darren and Heather are on their way. I was just in a room with them and I pressed something and it booted them out of the room. So they both have to sign back in. And then I will not touch anything after that. Once we get started, we'll actually get started. If anybody wants live transcriptions, you should be able to see a closed captioning icon on the bottom of your screen. So if that's useful for anyone, go ahead and click that. You should be able to see that. Are you able to see? Yeah, pretty cool, right?
Is that a new feature? That's super cool.
It is a new feature. It used to be that that you had to like have a third-party translator kind of hook into Zoom and do a thing. And now this is directly in Zoom.
If it's as good as their transcription service, then you might get multiple variations of the word queer, depending upon, you know, how clearly you say it or how it comes up in conversation. But with my research, you know, I did the auto transcription in Zoom. And you know, depending upon which participant and, you know, and so many of the words like bi, like people would use bi, you know, and talking about bisexuality, and like Zoom just didn't know what to do with some of these LGBTQ terms that my participants were using. And so it's been very fun to go through those transcripts. So we'll see what how well the captioning does. And if the captioning does better than the transcripts, I'd be like, okay, y'all need to get that technology over to your transcription service.
Yeah, it seems to be fairly accurate so far. Hey, Gabe, welcome.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Heather.
Hi.
Sorry about that. I like pressed something and it shut everything down. So not my intention, but welcome back. And I think Darren's on his way back as well.
Yes, he got the message. We
Oh,
just,
there's
we
Darren.
got confused because we went back to the same place, so.
Yeah, I thought that there was one link, and there was not just one link, because I don't know, because I messed that up. But here we are, we're all here, and this is the link that was made public. So this is the place to be.
Hi, everyone.
Okay. So I think we're ready to start. Heather, would you like to introduce yourself?
I can, or Darren can.
Yeah, I'll
Introducing yourself is weird.
I'll do
Okay,
a very,
go ahead.
very informal introduction because Heather is first a friend. We met a few years back at the Wild Goose Festival in Hot Springs, North Carolina, which if you've never been there, it's basically going into the middle of the woods on top of a mountain where there's no cell phone coverage and there's lots of like flying things. I think they call them bugs. And I'm not that person, but I made some amazing connections there. I was there with my band, The Many, and Heather just kind of rolled up in the space, and we started talking about things, especially around justice and disability. And Heather also showed up for me in some ways of just kind of doing some personal coaching and helping me to like refine my vision of what I do in the world. And so I am super, super, super thankful for Heather. I'm thankful for her voice. She is a powerful, powerful advocate, an intersectional advocate. I'll let Heather introduce her own intersections, but she shows up in multiple ways in the world and reminds us that all of our stories matter, and that we can fight for justice for all of us. And justice for all of us really means for all of us, not just people who are able, not just people who are neurotypical, not just people who are a certain gender or sexual orientation, but we all can be free. So with that being said, I hand it over to Heather, and do your thing.
Thank you, Darren. I need to be wary of you introducing me because that makes me almost cry. So thank you for that lovely introduction. So Darren and Carrie asked me to speak tonight, and they said, can you speak on something related to disability? I'm like, that's a really big topic. I should probably narrow it down like just a little bit. So I decided I'd narrow it all the way down to one word. But the word is a big word. The word is belonging. And I think that belonging is a really good word for us to talk about. I asked them, what conversations around disability have you been having as a group? And they were like, we haven't yet. And I'm like, okay, so this is a really good place to start, because I think that belonging is central to what all people in all realms of intersectionality need. So I think we can all it can be a place where we start with, but I also know that belonging can have some complicatedness attached to it for a lot of us. And so I'm going to be using something called Mentimeter tonight. We're going to do 3 little check-ins using it. And I'm going to start by asking you, oops, wrong order. I'm going to put a link in the chat. I have not done this in a presentation before, so please bear with me. I'm sorry. I'm going to start by asking you if you would help me kind of just sketch out where you're coming from when I say the word belonging. So if you can go to that link. And then I'm almost there. Thank you for being patient. All right, there we go. So if you're at that link, you should be able to see some spots where you can add words. And as you add those words, it's going to anonymously fill this board. That's right. to help us see what belonging means for us. And we each get 3 words. So just give you a minute to think about that. What thoughts and words and feelings come to mind when you think of the word belonging? Oh, we've got some other ones. I like that. Sacred, yes.
I lost my screen for that. I don't know what happened to it. Oh, here we go. I can't do it.
No, is it being difficult? You have, sometimes when we're doing share screen, you have to pull it down, like minimize it so that you can see the rest of what's going on. I apologize, but we've got some great words: shalom and accepted, adoption, sacred, participation, similarity, home, togetherness, valued, inclusion, loved, safety, everyone, ongoing hug. I like that. Exclusion. Belonging doesn't always work, right? Sometimes there's belonging and we are outside of it. Participation, valued, together and togetherness. Trying to catch them all, but every time it moves, it's hard to catch them. Share, help, right? So we've got some great words there. Darren, do you mind just grabbing a screenshot of that for us before I stop the share? Just give me a thumbs up when you've got that. Awesome. Thank you, guys. So this whole idea of belonging is, our words kind of give us a hint that sometimes belonging feels like a good thing and sometimes it doesn't. And it really depends on whether we're inside of that or outside of that, right? And perhaps you come today with experiences of belonging that were great in your past or your present, and also perhaps you don't. Perhaps belonging that you've had in your past was taken from you or lost through some combination of factors that felt ultimately out of your control. We're going to take some time tonight to think about and talk about belonging. But because I know this can be such a tender spot for so many of us, I want to be clear about what tonight is going to be and what it isn't going to be, so that nobody gets lost in it, I'm hoping. I don't have a 3-point plan to meet all of our yearnings for belonging tonight. Just putting it out there. I'm sorry. I don't. I want to. We'll work on that. And although I am a coach and I help people work through trauma, and I will do my best to conduct this session through a trauma-informed lens, this will not be a talk primarily focused on the healing work we all need to do from the trauma of having belonging stolen from us, right? Or eroded slowly or never offered. If this is your story, and you're not alone if it is, I guarantee you at least one other person in this room has had that feeling and experience. I want to encourage you to reach out to someone safe to start working through this pain when you're ready. For tonight, I just want to simply say that I see you. Your pain is real, it's legitimate, and that hurt is part of the brokenness of this world that we live in. And I am going to keep praying and working for a day when that brokenness can find healing and wholeness and shalom. But for tonight, what I am going to try to do is a little bit more manageable in the time that I was given. I want to have a chance for us to talk about the path to belonging, because it's something we can or will, we can't, sorry, it isn't something we can or necessarily will automatically arrive at, right? How many spaces have you been in where you thought belonging was the idea and it wasn't? So we want to talk about that a little bit. And I'm hoping tonight will offer us a chance to talk about the theology of belonging, because I'm a bit of a theology nerd, just putting it out there, and how we were made to live in interdependent relationship with one another, and what spiritual practices, intentional postures, and practical actions we can use to lean into that call on our lives. I'm hoping to do all of that by drawing more from my disabled identity than my queer identity. And I can bring out some of the issues through that identity that I think can be easily missed or dismissed in these conversations. Finally, although we can't necessarily delve deep into the pain and loss of the times we have felt excluded or like there was no option for us to belong, I hope that tonight is an encouragement to you that you are not alone and that your desire for belonging is good and whole and even holy. So before we can talk about belonging, we have to talk about inclusion. But before we can talk about inclusion, we have to talk about access. And before we can talk about access, we have to talk about awareness. So, when was the last time you thought about disability? Just let that percolate in your head for a second. And what thoughts did you have or have you had about disability? Mentimeter will only let me do 2 of those cool little screens with where we get to add our words. So we're going to now do a second screen. And I think, sorry, 1 second. It is being difficult. We love technology. We try it. We really do. So I'd like you guys to go back to the Mentimeter, and we're going to ask ourselves a second question, which I think should be up there. And the question is, how have you thought about disability? And there are just 5 choices to choose from. Oops. Nope. There we go. Okay, so we have a 30-second countdown on here, and this will work better if I share the screen again. You guys are being so patient with me. Thank you. So if you're able to vote, what do you think of when you think about disability? All right, so we had sadness, suffering, and pain, special or differently abled, or part of the human experience were the answers that we got given in the time that we had there. Thank you for participating. These are just really snapshot words, but they encompass most of the answers that I get from people. This is sort of the range of experiences that I get when I say to people, you know, what do you think about when you think about disability? And just like with our LGBT conversations or with conversations around race, the very first step towards enabling belonging is awareness. This awareness is necessary in both directions. As disabled individuals, we have to build an awareness of ourselves and our own identities. Many folks with disabilities who are adults who are either undiagnosed or have had very little exposure to the disability community find it difficult to even reckon with or reconcile the idea that their experience is a disabled experience. And so it can take a long time for people to even sort of become aware of their own disabled identities. But also, the more we belong to ourselves, the easier it will be to belong with one another. So I think that this is really important. We have to do this work. More crucially these days, though, the able-bodied community needs to build an awareness of those of us with disabilities. Awareness of our history, our stories, our lived experiences. Awareness of our needs and the challenges in front of us. And we still, unfortunately, have a long way to go with that. Even in very otherwise aware spaces, in my experience, more often than not, disability is routinely forgotten from the list. You all know what I mean when I say the list, right? The list of like marginal intersections. If you look at those lists, if you look at how people frame who needs to be included in those lists, you will very frequently not see disabilities. And that's true in the church, and that's true in society as a whole. I heard one author who I love, respect, think she's amazing, give an inclusion list with more than a dozen points of access on it. And I just sat there waiting because I was like, there's so many on here. She's going to say us. She's going to say us. She's going to say us. She didn't say us. I went and talked to her afterwards. It's okay. I fixed it. But I had to go and talk to her. I had to fix it. And we go through these lists because awareness is the first step to belonging. If your identity is on one of those lists, you know what it feels like to realize that someone's remembered that you exist and that your needs are real and that you need to be at the table, right? So what happens when disability isn't even on the table? So awareness is where we have to start. We all know, though, that simply having our identities isn't going to be enough to have people really understand what our lives are like. So if you're comfortable, I know not everyone wants to say things on the Zoom call, but if you're comfortable, are there any ways that you're currently learning about identities that aren't your own? Doesn't have to be disability. Just what are some practices you're doing right now to lean into identities that you don't have yourself? Anyone brave enough? We have lots of options for this. Michael.
Hi.
Hi, Michael.
So one of the things I realized is that I grew up reading like, I don't know, cishet white dude like fiction. And so I've been trying to expand to, you know, POC main character or queer main character or both or all or as many as I can, and try to like expand all of my reading that way.
Amazing. Yes. Fiction reading, nonfiction reading. If we can get some of those characters, some of those voices, some of those experiences into our heads, it changes how we go out into the world, right? Anybody else doing anything to lean into learning about an identity that isn't their own?
I've been following more folks on my social media channels like Facebook, Twitter, where they belong to a different ethnic group, so that I can kind of hear more of like how they experience life, interpret things, what they're finding is important. So
Definitely. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess similar to Michael, like getting slightly more into like different fiction written by different people with different experiences. Learning about the kind of visceral part of like being marginalized or having an experience that's different from my own. I definitely want to do more of that though. And I've done a bit of reading theology by people with different experiences, which is very cool because it's similar to what I've been doing for years, which is like theology, but it's also, I mean, there was a time when I thought that queer people couldn't write theology, and here I am reading and being like, oh, look at all this, like, look at all these encounters with God that I no longer am missing out on. Yeah, again, something I'm repenting of and working towards doing better at.
It's a process. It's such a process. Couple more ideas. I can't tell the person who. Yeah, Mixwee. I wasn't sure how to say it. Sorry.
That's okay. You're not the only one. So I've been doing some of the strategies that have been already mentioned, Octavia Butler. I've also been reading Bell Hooks and a new bestseller that came out, N.K. Jemisin, The City We Became, or something like that. I'm super excited about it so far. Okay. And following people on social media, which has been super awesome. But I also teach And so for me, one of the really important things is to make sure that I'm including these different identities, different positionalities as the primary texts. And so, you know, like there's a scholar who works kind of at the intersection of disability studies and information science. And so I make sure that I include their work as, you know, like one of the top scholars, as well as people of color and people who are trans or queer, and privilege them. So that's another way that I try to learn more about identities other than my own, is by engaging with those scholars.
Amazing. Darren, did you have anything to add before we move on, or? Find your mic, find it. It's there somewhere.
There we go. Okay, I'm gonna rearrange my setup soon. One of the things, I mean, there's several identity groups and experiences that I've been trying to learn more. Some might even be surprising. In the last 2 years, I've had non-binary folks on my team, so I've been trying to learn to be a better advocate and speak up and, you know, correct pronouns and so forth where I can. I've been intentionally following people who talk about being neurodivergent. So whether that's being ADD or ADHD or on autism spectrum or whatever word you choose to describe autism, just seeing all the ways that so much of disability is just about the way society is structured that just excludes people as opposed to people being lacking in any kind of way. So it's been really important for me to like hear those voices and learn from those folks.
Thank you. Yeah, I've just added something to the chat if folks want to catch it. There's a link at the top, and that's a book, but also a website that has like interviews and other things. It's the Disability Visibility Project, and Alice Wong is heading that up, but she's working really hard to include a lot of different voices. And then I also put in some of the hashtags that I currently am following on Twitter to get some interesting disability voices, because we already know how to do this. Like I didn't have to tell you that that's how you learn about a group that you don't know about. You know how to do this, but I want to encourage you to stretch that. And just encourage you to be aware of the need to do that around disability. Because in almost every space I go into, we need to add the disability identity back into the list. And then we also need to follow up by listening and learning and entering into relationships across these lines of diversity. We need to build friendships. We need to look out for new hashtags to follow. We need to seek out academic and also more approachable readings on the subject. And you guys are clearly doing this work already. So I'm sort of preaching to the converted, but that's always a little bit fun. We can always pat ourselves on the back a bit, but sometimes just saying it out loud helps us to remember that we need to be allies in this space, right? These are things we can encourage the people around us to do. You guys are here meeting together on purpose so that you can encourage your broader communities to be thinking about this, right? So I want to just give a quick mention that as you enter into the disability space, you need to be aware that just like in so many other spaces, language can be a place of contention, particularly between caregivers and folks with disabilities. This means that a lot of the things you've been told about how to speak about disability and disabled individuals, the things like person first language, the awkward phrases like differently abled or special needs, those mostly aren't going to resonate well with those of us who are disabled. Of course, it's not true across the board. We couldn't be that simple. You know that as well as anybody else. But one of the tweets I've put out there that's probably the most liked or resonated with on this subject is just, I don't have special needs, I have human needs, right? So, but my human needs have disabilities. there are genuine, real, structural, and physical barriers between me getting what I need and where I'm at. So I do invite you to check out the Disability Visibility Project. Follow some of these folks on these hashtags on Twitter. Feel free to look me up and follow me. I'll put my @ on here as well. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. I'm not very good at remembering these things off the top of my head. But I encourage you to start listening. There isn't as much written on this subject as I would like. There aren't as many books on it as I would prefer. But if you want to hit me up on Twitter, I don't mind linking to some of the folks that I'm listening to, and also linking to some of the books that I think are valuable on the subject. So can someone offer some good wisdom around how they listen well in identity spaces that are not their own? What are some of the things we want to make sure we're doing when we enter into these identity spaces when they're not ours?
I mean, just being, of course, I'm the first one to say, speak up, being slow to speak. Sometimes we center our own like experience of being in another space and take up space by telling everybody, oh, this is so different for me. And it's just like, yes, we know.
Well, we do that for a reason. Like, let's name this. We do that because we start to feel uncomfortable, because all of a sudden people are talking about things and we don't know what that's like. And we start to think, well, maybe I don't belong here, right? Which is an interesting point for tonight when we're talking about belonging. But just remember, like, there's a valid reason for why we do that. But sit with it, breathe with it, listen to it, lean into it. Anybody else have some ideas, thoughts?
I was just going to suggest, believe what people tell you.
Oh, thank you, Ellen. Yes. Yes. When you come into some of these spaces, some of the things that people are going to be saying about their experiences are going to feel so far removed from your own experience that it's going to be hard to accept that. You know, they're going to say, well, the doctors tell me that it's all in my head and I should just get up and start walking. But I know if I do that, it's going to make me sicker. And if your experience of doctors has been really positive and you've, you know, gone to see the doctor and they've given you medicine or a treatment plan and you've followed it and you've gotten better, then you're likely to think that maybe they should try, right? I'm going to encourage you to take Ellen's advice there and believe them, and listen for a while and follow the links of the people that they're listening to and listen to them for a while. There are some hard realities at the margins of medical science that we don't know about if we're not spending time there. I think we have time for one more piece of advice if anyone has, for how we engage in spaces of identity that aren't our own. Gabe, I can see your brain working.
Thanks. I was just thinking on that last point is that I try to wrap my head around or appreciate, like, if somebody's describing how they experience things differently, like what that must be like to be able to better understand, but also remember that I ultimately probably won't understand it all, but just to be as a part of being able to better like accept, you know, exactly what Ellen said, like that's their reality. So to be able to better appreciate why that's for them or the way it is for them. So.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. You're making this so good. It's so awesome to be working with you guys on this. Thank you for having me. So point one in a nutshell then is this: until we decide to start looking and seeing, we will find it very difficult to get anywhere close to belonging, because awareness is the first step to belonging. That makes sense? Any questions so far? Okay. So before we move on to our second step, I want to pause I want to give you a brief history of mining, which I promise it's going to connect. Trust me. Okay. So once upon a time, during the Industrial Revolution, in a land that may or may not be close to where you live right now, depending on how close you are to Virginia, there were some early coal miners. Now, these coal miners realized relatively quickly that although coal mining paid a little bit better than subsistence farming, when they got too far underground, sometimes people collapsed, stopped breathing, and died. Now, of course, this was back in the days when it was seen as a bad thing to allow a situation where people would suddenly collapse, stop breathing, and die to continue unabated. We seem to have lost that thread somewhere, but I digress. Dads and brothers and sons, wives and sisters and daughters would go down into the mines, but they wouldn't come back up. So they thought to themselves, if only there were some way we could have an early warning system for when this was going to happen, then we would have time to get out alive. But since the gases were odorless and colorless, there didn't seem to be very much of a chance for that to happen. And then someone, I'm guessing not in management, had an idea. They decided to get a canary, a songbird, put it in a cage, and bring it down into the mine with them. They realized that with smaller lungs, the canary that would otherwise sing incessantly and keep them company down in the depths of the dark would stop singing before the miners would be overcome with the gas, and that would give them time to get out. These birds became so loved and cared about by the miners that there are even drawings of the cages that they made that include oxygen tanks for the birds so that they could be revived again. These canaries in the coal mine gave their name to an expression that continues to indicate an early warning system in our 21st century world. Tonight, I'm going to suggest to you that those of us with disabilities are your canaries in the coal mine. So I want you to think of the last time you were at an in-person gathering. And unless you're joining us from New Zealand, I'm really hoping that was a long time ago, and that you're staying safe wherever you are. But if you can remember that far back, I want you to think about who was in that room. What representation was there? How many of the people there were disabled that you knew of? Now I want you to think about the space that you were in. Where was it? How did you get into it? Were there stairs? Were there chemical smells of any sort? What was the lighting like? Were there accessible bathrooms? What time did it take place at? How much background noise was there? All of these questions are access questions. Access questions come after awareness, but before inclusion or belonging. They cover the very most basic first step of the process, but so often they get missed. And maybe you're sitting there thinking, but no one in that group has a disability, so why does it matter? I want you to try something with me. If you haven't done so already, I want you to click the closed caption link at the bottom of your screen. And then I want you to stay mindful of what impact having access to the subtitles has on your physicality and especially your cognition, that Zoom fatigue everyone spent all year talking about. What changes does it make to your fatigue or your concentration to have access to closed captions? As an aside, this is brand new for Zoom. I'm so excited. They started it this week. This is massively awesome. So we're going to test it out. And while you're testing that out, I want you to think of the last time you went to a grocery store. Did you take a trolley out to your car? Did you put your groceries into a buggy to pull to the bus stop? Did you have to open the door to leave the building? Or did you go right through an automatic door? Did you have to step down onto the parking lot or road off of a curb? Or did you wheel down through a curb cut? Did you have to pull the buggy up 4 stairs of the bus, or did the bus kneel to let you on with a single short step? Any answers? If you had the experience that I had the last time I went to a grocery store, you went through automatic doors, down a curb cut, and if you went onto a bus and you were in a wheelchair, not only did the bus kneel, but the ramp came out and you went straight on it, right? Okay, so check in with your body and mind. Has the closed captioning changed anything? Are you having to work any less hard to concentrate? Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. What do you think? Does it make a difference? I see 1 thumbs up, 2 thumbs up, 3, 4. So, that's valid. I think Elizabeth had her thumb up. It was just underneath of their name label there. Thank you. Ellen's a so too. That's totally valid. The thing about access, depending on who we are, is that access can help more of us than just those of us who absolutely need it. If you benefited from the closed captioning, if you pushed your trolley out through automatic doors and down a smooth curb cut to your car, if you got on the bus without having to heft your buggy up each and every step, then you benefited from access. Because here's the thing about access. Without access, those of us with disabilities can't possibly be included, much less belong. But access isn't just there for those of us with disabilities. Those with disabilities are simply the canaries in the coal mine, letting you know that the world could be a better place. How you could use less cognitive resources, put less unnecessary stress on your body and mind and emotions, and in the process, make it possible for those of us with disabilities to join in for whatever party you're having. Now, one of the key points of awareness, whether it's of disabilities or the gases that live deep in a coal mine, is to give us the opportunity to attend to the need for accessibility. We can't have one without the other. We can try, but it can end very badly. It's not enough to just say, I'm going to make this space accessible. We have to go back and listen to the people who we want to have in the space, because they're the ones that are going to tell us this works and this doesn't. They're the ones that know. But the information that they give us is going to benefit us as well, right? Okay, so let's assume you're being aware. You know that there are people with disabilities and you've been listening to their needs and you're in enough relationship with them to have got the gist of what their lives are like. And you've decided you want them to have a space of belonging in your group. Now let's assume you've taken care of access. You have a barrier-free path of travel to your event. The washrooms are accessible. You've listened to their need for a chemical-free space, or you've turned on closed captioning for your Zoom call and adjusted the event to start early enough in the evening for them to be able to attend. For a lot of people, the next question is, how do I make sure I'm being inclusive? Now, in general, I think we talk a lot about inclusion. In the disability world, inclusion classes and inclusion groups are quite common, though. And it's in those spaces that I've started to realize that inclusion may not be all it's been touted as being. See, when I was in school, I was able-bodied enough and neurotypical enough to be in a regular classroom without any supports, but I was disabled enough and autistic enough to have to sit out during gym and recess and never have anyone to sit with at lunchtime. When I went to the children's rehab hospital twice a year for them to adjust my leg braces, I used to wander around where I was waiting and look with longing down the hall at the school for the inpatient children, who all got to go to school together with their wheelchairs and canes and crutches and know that neither they nor their pain was alone. Can anyone relate to this experience of being included, but feeling like there was still a vast chasm between you, or maybe you and others like you, and the rest of the group? Anybody been there, done that, got that t-shirt? I see some nods. What do you think makes that the case?
just not being able to fully participate or feel connected, not being able to have people share your experience and really share theirs, and you know, you can be physically integrated and still just suffer a ton of stigma and feel like you're being treated like some sort of object.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You just summarized that so well, Ellen. Thank you. That was just fabulous. I don't want to talk badly about inclusion because I think inclusion is critically important. Although, remember, impossible without awareness and accessibility. But because of what we talked about, I don't think inclusion is a great end goal. And because Carrie was either kind enough or misinformed enough to give me the microphone tonight, unless she kicks me out of the room, I'm going to tell you why. Are you getting this yet, Carrie? I don't know. To me, inclusion only gets us so far. Inclusion creates structures that allow marginalized individuals into a space, but in most cases, they maintain a controlled, predictable, and distanced relationship at best. Inclusion often uses programming and ministry too in its engagement with marginalized individuals who are purposely kept in a minority or even tokenistic position. It doles information out to folks through the language, culture, and comfort of the center, but rarely creates a two-way conversation. The possibly unintended consequence is that it creates a two-tiered group, introducing or reinforcing power divides and unwittingly limiting and constraining all from experiencing the full breadth of community. Finally, to me, at least, inclusion is only about entrance. It's about whether or not I will be tolerated or not. That's it. It's the password to the secret clubhouse, but that doesn't mean I'm not relegated to the awkward perch in the back corner. Does that make sense? Does it resonate with anything you've experienced? Here's the crazy thing. I don't think inclusion is just problematic for those on the margins. I'm convinced that limiting ourselves to inclusion causes damage to everyone in the group. Yeah? So if awareness and access and even inclusion won't get us all the way to where we want to go, and if all of us are missing out, what's left? The answer is belonging. And how do we get to it? It's theology time. Okay, can I get a quick show of hands for my fellow theology nerds? I don't think I'm the only one here, but maybe. Oh, yay, I'm not the only one here. Okay, excellent, good. For those of you who don't think you're into theology, try to stick with me for a couple of minutes. I think I can make this fun and it's really short, promise. So, little more than 1600 years ago, there was this guy named Gregory of Nazianzus. Don't worry, there's no spelling test. Gregory was friends with this guy named Basil, although it's written like Basil, and apparently that's not the right way to say it. So I try. Anyways, there's Gregory, Basil, and another guy whose name was confusingly Gregory as well. And the three of them were writers and thinkers, and they were also politicians in the newly Christianizing eastern part of the Roman Empire. They were also spiritual leaders. So there was a lot of upheaval and change going on in their day. There was a lot of sickness and disease. There was a famine coming that was going to have devastating consequences just a couple of years after they were writing. I know you can't relate to any of this, but the biggest concern they had at the time was around how Christians should live in this new social order where Christians were no longer being actively persecuted and instead had gained significant power and wealth. Gregory and Basil took a look around. They noticed that there were a large number of lepers in the community. These lepers were the poorest of the poor. They were maimed and disfigured, sometimes blind. They were cast out of their homes, denied access to work, sometimes even denied access to communal water resources. They were blamed for their condition. It was seen to be a sign that the gods, or indeed God, had turned his back on them. Now, Basil decided that Christians should take a role in addressing this situation. He was the very first to create spaces of hospitality, or what we now call hospitals, to take care of the sick and the poor, including those with leprosy. But to build them, he had to have some money. So his friend Gregory wrote a fundraising speech. He took the speech out into the community and he started to give it. Although the famine seems to have delayed the process a bit, within less than 15 years, the community was up and operational and making a difference. So we know that his fundraising was successful. If you've ever tried to raise money for a hospital, you know 15 years is very, very quick. What's interesting to us today is what he said. So first of all, Gregory showed a clear and keen awareness of the lepers and their lived experience. He talked about the way their leprosy had cut them off from their family and friends, their jobs and their homes. He talked about the way that they lost so much of their identity that they would go around town crying out, "My name is so-and-so, and my parents are so-and-so, and I used to live in such and such a place," in an attempt to be seen and recognized for who they were. And he talked about how often that was not enough to actually have their very most basic needs met. So he talked about them with awareness, and he talked about the access that they needed. He explained that leprosy was far less contagious than people thought, and was convinced, quite correctly we now know, that access to good nutrition and wound care would make an enormous difference on their quality of life. This was what the hospital was setting out to offer. Then he talks about the fact that it is okay for his listeners to have wealth and food and clothes and homes, but only, he said, to the extent to which this wealth and food and clothes and housing is extended to the lepers. He says, it is in the inclusion of the leper that these riches are sanctified. Otherwise, he warns, they may be a disease of the soul far worse than leprosy will ever be on the body. These aren't direct quotes, I'm summarizing, but he's a bit intense, right? And you can also see why I kind of like him. I dig my dude Gregory. But then, after all of that, he offers two stunning, mind-boggling statements. First, he tells his audience that the lepers are equals with them as part of the body of Christ, that they belong to one another. That just as the eyes can't say to the hands they aren't needed, so too the Christians can't say to the Christian lepers they don't belong to the body of Christ. That's pretty radical, right? This isn't awareness or access. This isn't second tier arm's length inclusion. This is full belonging. But then he goes one step further. He tells his audience that although they have something the lepers need from them, money, the lepers have something his audience needs from them far more. That's because to Gregory, the lepers embody the suffering of Christ in their bodies in a way that make them ministers and examples of what it means to be a Christian, that his audience needs to hear. In fact, Gregory asserts that it is the lepers who offer the true healing, not the other way around in this relationship. That engaging in relationships of mutual belonging offers the opportunity for his listeners to heal from their selfishness and spiritual disease. And that if they go to the lepers for this healing, says Gregory, then they will have a chance of being welcomed fully by Christ when they die. Wow. Every time I read that, every time I say that, it just blows my mind. Do you see it? Do you see how radical that is compared to where his listeners started? They started out avoiding and ignoring the existence of the disabled people around them, looking past them as they scuttled by the beggars on the corner, looking through them as they reached out their stumps to plead for even a crust of bread. There was no awareness, much less access or inclusion. And now Gregory has taken them through all of these points in just 39 typed pages of text. And here we are at a belonging that is not only accepted, but is interdependent. Both the lepers and his audience have something to offer one another. Both of their survival depends on this interdependent relationship. Together, they make up the body of Christ, and they cannot function as a body without all of the bodies being fully present. Do you see how incredible it is? Since that's a lot to take in, I want us to take a moment to process this. And I want us to start by thinking about this passage that Gregory is talking about. I am going to put it up on my screen and on our shared screen. And I am going to ask if someone would be willing to read out this passage for us. There's nothing hiding, so you see what you're signing up for. Someone willing to read this out for us?
I'll go for it if no one's itching to jump in. No
Awesome.
promises here.
Thank you. Go for it.
One body with many members. For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. For in the one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and we were all made to drink of one Spirit. Indeed, the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot would say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. And if the ear would say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be? If the whole body were hearing, where would the sense of smell be? But as it is, God arranged the members of the body, each one of them as he chose. If all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many members, yet one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. On the contrary, the members of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable, and those members of the body that we think less honorable, we clothe with greater honor, and our less respectable members are treated with greater respect. Whereas our more respectable members do not need this, but God has so arranged the body, giving the greater honor to the inferior member, that there may be no dissension within the body, but the members may have the same care for one another. If one member suffers, all suffer together with it. If one member is honored, all rejoice together with it. Now you are the body of Christ.
Thank you. So in Paul's day, it's fairly safe to say that medical knowledge was limited, even anatomically. So I'm going to take us back to Mentimeter one last time, and I want you to work together on the final question. I need to figure out how to get us to the final question. And I want you to help us come up with as many names for parts of the body as possible. The more esoteric and unthought about, the better, okay? If you know about neuromuscular junctions, then pop them on there. Ear canal, yep. Pop on as many as you can. You can answer more than 3 times this time. We want as many answers as we can find here. Got an ear canal and a kneecap so far. Elbow, yep. Synapse, a toenail, a neuron. So the toenail can't say to the neuron, I don't need you. Because you know what happens to the toenail if it doesn't have a neuron to get information to it? It dies. I watched. It wasn't very comfortable. The lymph nodes and the pinky toes and the sternum, they can't say to each other, I don't need you. Because if the sternum doesn't have the lymph nodes pumping things around, right? What's going to happen to the heart underneath of it, the lungs underneath of it? How is that going to stretch and potentially even damage the sternum? We've got our gluteus maximus. And like, honestly, the lungs cannot say that they don't need the gluteus maximus because it really helps to be able to sit up sometimes to breathe, right? Especially when you're kind of trying to get your breath, right? If you can't sit up, you don't get a lot of breath going. So you can start to see like they're all connected. The kneecap can't say to the capillaries, I don't need you. How is this going to get enough blood flow to stay healthy and heal when it gets banged into, right? When you get that bruise on your kneecap because you hit the wall again. Okay, maybe that's just me. I'm a little klutzy. So we've got all of these parts of the body, right? And some of them are parts we think about, and some of them are parts we really don't think about. And over the years, I've met people who had received organ donation for organs that had always been diseased or damaged from as far back as they could remember. And I've met people who have been struggling for years because they didn't even know that a part of their body wasn't working, but the impacts were wreaking havoc on them in their lives. And the most common experience of this is when someone gets glasses for the first time or after a major prescription change, and they suddenly realize that the splodgy things on the trees are leaves, and they're individual and incredibly detailed. In the same way, Gregory tells us that if our churches and communities are missing out on the presence and contribution of those with disabilities, whatever form that looks like, then they are missing out on part of what the body is meant to be. Darren, can you grab me another screenshot? Thank you, sir. So, how do we get to belonging? Just give me a thumbs up when you've got it. If we aren't yet at awareness, we start by following people and listening to people and reading from people's experiences. Just like when it comes to gender and sexuality experiences, racial experiences, poverty or addiction experiences, or any other area of marginalization. We have the skills, we just need to start applying them to this lens. Once we're practicing awareness, we're going to start to see the ways in which access is or isn't present in the spaces we inhabit. My friends are much more aware now of stairs at entrances, the toilets, the lighting, the noise, the scents, and the food ingredients than they were before we were friends. In pre-COVID times, they got excited about finding a new place we could visit, a new food I could eat, a new activity we could do together that I could fully join in with. They asked questions about access out of our shared relationship. This shared relationship pushes them to want to include me in things. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Not everyone understands that in certain settings and for certain activities, it's not going to be enough to just invite me to attend. Even if there's technically speaking access, simply offering an invitation may still leave me on the sidelines, unable to participate, feeling sick, exhausted, lonely, or all of the above. Most of the time, this type of inclusion feels like charity and leaves me wanting to have a long hot shower and a good cry to get rid myself of the toxins. But what if they actually want to offer belonging? How might that work? I have 3 ideas for cultivating belonging in community. And because remember, we're canaries in the coal mine, these ideas for belonging are impactful for everyone, not just those of us with disabilities. I want to point out that each of these requires the buy-in, the full buy-in and participation of everyone who wishes to belong together. It requires effort from the disabled and the abled, from the margins and the center. It doesn't happen in simply one direction, and it never will work that way. But it is possible when we work together. Idea number 1 is that belonging starts by truly seeing one another. We cannot belong without first being known fully as ourselves. We cannot be known if we aren't first seen. Just like Gregory's first audience, just like the incredibly necessary and hard conversations we've been having about things like race this year, belonging for the disability community, for our entire community, will start when we have the courage to truly see one another's lived realities. Our pain, our sadness, our frustrations, our hopes, our fears, our needs, and the systemic injustices that stand between us and having those needs met. We can't respond with access, inclusion, or belonging until we make ourselves vulnerable enough to see one another and be seen. Idea number 2 is that belonging is formed in the midst of interconnected relationships. Having seen each other, belonging becomes rooted through interconnected relationships. If we truly believe that we are the interconnected, interdependent body of Christ, then we need to make space, in whatever shape that looks like, for everyone to join us at a central, equal table. Over the years, I think the space I've seen belonging cultivated best is over shared meals. But I've also seen belonging cultivated by showing up for one another with a work party, a bag of groceries, a meal on the doorstep. The radical hospitality behind these interconnected relationships includes answering the phone when people call, reaching out with a text to check up on one another, advocating with someone at the welfare office or driving them to the doctor's office, sitting and crying with them, making them breakfast at 1 o'clock in the afternoon when they haven't eaten anything yet, or sending out for Uber Eats to order when you're too far away to show up in person. That's because radical hospitality opens up the boundaries of who we think of as family. Some of us know what a good family feels like. If that's you, I think you likely know how fortunate you are. Some of us know what an amazing chosen family feels like. We know the work and effort and time and commitment to showing up it takes to create that kind of a family. It is in a commitment to this type of interconnected relationships that belonging develops. Idea number 3 is that belonging requires each of us to show up fully as ourselves. Each of us has a unique contribution to offer as part of the body of Christ. But for us to feel like we truly belong, we have to show up in community as our full and authentic selves. Authenticity is cultivated through vulnerability and through the underlying assumption that each and every person has something of value and worth to offer the community. This posture of belonging requires that we make space for and encourage one another to contribute in ways that are authentic to who they are. When we offer everyone the opportunity to bring their gifts, talents, and abilities into community, it subverts the idea that there are some who are outsiders and some who are insiders, and replaces this thinking with the idea that we each have something to offer each other. It creates far deeper levels of discipleship in all members of our community and paves the way to radical transformation. This subversion has to be both taught and caught. Most of us can't dream these worlds of belonging into existence from our limited perspectives and experiences. We need to see people like us leading, teaching, serving, caring, to know that it is worth the risk of putting ourselves out there to try. Finally, I know I promised you 3, but actually there's 4. Idea number 4 is that belonging celebrates the presence of our whole selves in spite of and because of the measures and complexity that they bring. Belonging, you see, celebrates presence. It delights in my unique contributions and perspectives, whoever I am and however that presence presents itself. Belonging means that whoever I am welcomed entirely as myself. Disabilities and abilities, ethnicity, language, culture, age, economic background, trauma, baggage, and all, to be entirely myself, with all of my giftings and all of my challenges, and engage fully as myself, to the extent of my abilities, for the purposes of building up the body of Christ. To be clear, celebrating diversity is messy, complicated, and potentially frustrating. Sometimes diversity leads to conflicting access needs. Sometimes it requires learning to move at a different pace or learning to listen in a new way. Yet I would argue that it's worth it because belonging ultimately teaches in actions and relationships that go far deeper than words what Jesus spent his ministry teaching us. That each of us is loved entirely as we are and granted the grace to become a little more fully each and every day the person God always intended for us to be. In so doing, it allows us to reattach to ourselves and to each other and to God and see the Great Commission fulfilled a little more fully in our presence. Now, I've said a lot of words. There have been a lot of thoughts. I want to give us some time to process this. But Carrie, I can't remember whether I have 75 minutes or 90. So you need to tell me how many I have so I process it within our time frame.
You have till 8:30.
Awesome. Awesome. Can we send everyone away in groups of 2 to 3 for 8 minutes? I know that's a very specific number, but that gets us to 8:20 and gives us 10 minutes to wrap up. You're going to go into groups of 2 or 3, and I want you to think of 3. I want you to talk about 3 questions. You're going to have to talk fast. I get it. Question number 1, what ways are you already engaging with folks with disabilities? Question number 2, to what extent are these relationships of inclusion, and to what extent are they relationships of belonging? And number 3, what is one thing you'll take away from tonight that would help you move towards deeper relationships of belonging? Awesome. Thank you for putting those in the chat, Carrie. Do you need me to pop the 3rd one in so you can?
Oh, we're ready.
Oh.
Great. So we are in groups of 2s and 3s. And
Come back at 8:20.
sounds perfect. I just need to do one more thing. Okay, here we go.
Awesome.
Hello?
You will automatically be moved to the main session after 16 seconds. If you want to join main session immediately, please press pound.
Somebody needs to press pound. Oh dear.
Cool.
Hi, everyone. Hi, so yes, we can read this.
Lisa, we see your hand up. Do you want to say something? Or type something? Oh, okay. Yeah. So you're not muted now, and we can read it.
You are muted.
All right. So I'm getting some feedback. Can we do something about that, Carrie?
Yeah.
Can people hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello?
Hi there, Lisa.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yes,
Oh,
can you
okay.
hear us?
Oh, okay. Yes, now I can. That's great. I'm glad it's working. I was having connectivity issues. I wanted to bring up point. It
Lisa, I'm sorry to interrupt you. If you can hear me, you're breaking up. Are you on a phone or are you on a computer?
sorry. Can people hear me now?
You're coming in and out, unfortunately. I really want to hear what you have to say. It might be easier if you are able to type it in the chat for us. That way we actually get all of it.
And if it helps, there's also a telephone number where you can call in. I'll see if I can find that for you.
While Lisa's typing, does anyone else have anything they want to bring back to us from their discussion? Anything that surprised you, stood out to you? Any nugget you're taking away from this tonight?
I'll just quickly say I always appreciate that that my good buddy Richard there like names how age and being older often gets left out of many spaces in the same way. There's age can be a disadvantage both at being young or being old, but in many aspects that's one of those things that just gets left out of the conversation and it's just like, oh, that's nice, somebody older came.
Yeah, Yeah, age is important, and I did include it in my list on purpose because I see that one often being left out. Thanks for that. Lisa's question is, why is it so important to belong? And maybe it's not important or shouldn't be important to belong. I know what I think of that. Does anyone have anything they want to say to that first? Is belonging important? And if so, why? Or why not?
Because we're all part of the body. We all need each other. You can't function without the foot, the hand, the blood, the everything. But aside from the theological, just on a practical level, it's just not healthy for individuals to be apart. We need each other.
Yeah.
Nobody should be alone.
I think that's entirely correct. I think for me, we can't grow and change and become the people we were made to be when we are just on our own. That doesn't mean we never need to spend time on our own. We definitely do. But belonging happens, what happens in a space of belonging is a chance for us to heal places of brokenness in us that are not possible on our own. I say that as a coach. I say that as a person who experienced trauma and had to do a lot of therapy work. But even the therapy work, it was only part of the answer. And a lot of the answer came by finding a community where I belonged, where I was, where my authentic, real, vulnerable self was wanted and invited into again and again and again. And where even when I showed up and was a mess, they kept saying, I want you to keep going. We're going to walk through this with you. And what that created, the possibilities that created are way too many to say in the 3 minutes I have left tonight. But they were massive. And I think I want to say all of that, but I also want to acknowledge that saying that belonging matters is scary, because putting ourselves in places of belonging, thinking about creating spaces of belonging is risky and vulnerable. And when we've been hurt and when we've felt excluded, this whole belonging thing, it can feel like too much. And if it feels like too much today, that's okay. It's not something we have to force ourselves into in one night. This is just a little nugget, and I'm just popping it out there so that we can engage with it. I see what you've written, Lisa. Maybe society places too much importance on belonging, which maybe it shouldn't be that way. If someone doesn't belong, will that affect their self-esteem or quality of life? If so, that's not good, because you're tying yourself to people when maybe it's not so good to tie yourself with others. I think I'd love to say that we can just be independent. But if we thought that was possible before 2020, I think this year has sort of been a mic drop on the fact that we can't. We are interdependent. There is no way around that. The question is whether we'll take the risk to find belonging, or whether we will just end up with the awkward, hard parts of being interdependent. Like, those are sort of our choices, right? We can either lean in and try to find the good parts of interdependence, or we can get trapped in just dealing with the hard parts and the leftovers and the vestiges of interdependence. But I don't think we can get away from that. But I want to there's definitely a difference between interdependence and codependence. I am not talking about codependence. That is not the same thing. And I agree, we don't want that. But I do want to say, you know, whether it's Lisa or somebody else, I'm going to try to keep to that 8:30. I'm going to be a couple minutes over, Carrie, I'm sorry. But if what I've said has struck a nerve, has pushed some buttons, and you want to talk some more about it, please get a hold of me. I'm going to pop my email address in the chat. I am more than happy to have a conversation. I'm off school the next couple of weeks, and I'll set up a Zoom call, and we can talk more about this. I don't want anyone to feel like they've been dropped in a hole. And I see that Lisa's dropped off the call, Darren. If you can make sure that she gets that, that would be great. I have not seen that podcast, and I will click the link so that I can go there later on. I do know Stephanie. I know some of the stuff that she has to say, so we will see. I'm just going to finish this off with a quick blessing if I can. I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. Thank you for taking the first steps in this conversation around belonging. Thank you for making space for my disabled voice in this conversation. May you see and be deeply seen. May you offer, engage in, and experience interconnected, not codependent relationships. May you find spaces where you can be fully yourself, even as you seek to make space for others to be fully themselves. And may you be celebrated for exactly the person you are, even as you celebrate those around you. May you move ever closer to full belonging in the body of Christ. And may this belonging lead you ever closer to the person and community you were always meant to be and be part of. Amen. Thank you all for having me. Thank you for engaging in this conversation. And if you want to continue it, please send me an email. Let's continue the conversation at some point. I hate shutting these things down, but I'm a minute over, and that's too many minutes already. So
Thank you, Heather. Thank you very much. Well done. So just one quick announcement before we close out for our final meeting of 2020. We've been meeting at 7 p.m. Eastern time on the third Sunday for 2020. In 2021, we're not going to meet in January because we've got conference in January and lots of other things are happening. But starting in February of 2021, we'll be meeting on the second Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. So mark your calendars. I'll send out an email kind of announcing, reminding as we get closer, but our first kind of evening back for this gathering will be on February 14th. We will spend Valentine's evening together for whoever who wants to do that. And if you don't want to do that, if you don't want to be with us, if you want to be with someone else, totally fine. But that'll be our first gathering for the new year. Darren.
My microphone's on mute. All right. Thank you so much, Carrie. Thank you so much to Heather. Thank you for all of you who showed up, even those who are gone now. I really appreciate the ways that we're able to create space together, the ways that we are very actively, just by the act of us gathering together, we are making the body of Christ more whole, more complete, and we are doing the work that makes QCF a more inclusive, equitable, and diverse place where we experience and where our goal is that everyone really does belong. And so I'm hoping that all of you have the most amazing holidays. Christmas is coming up, and any other holidays that you celebrate during this time of year. I'm again just thankful that you've been showing up in the midst of a global pandemic. We've been able to do some really amazing things. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing those who attend the conference. If in case anyone is thinking of not attending, and if there's financial burdens or anything, there are plenty of scholarships available. It's all online. If you're not sure about that, just reach out to myself or to Carrie. And yeah, other than that, we'll see you in February. So thanks again, everybody. Have a great night.
Thanks so much for speaking and everything.